So, welcome to this week's episode of Pop Culture Movies from 1979. This week,
We're
this week we're
certainly
going to
getting a
be
bit
looking
niche,
at
aren't we?
yeah. This week we're going to be looking at Chris Petit's Radio 1. It's his 1979 scrapbook of what was cool in the cultural landscape of 1979.
Yeah, I think a scrapbook is a pretty good way of summing it up. Actually, it definitely has that feel. It's not somebody that's set out to make a groundbreaking piece of cinema. It's more them just saying, it's like a mission statement, isn't it? It's like these are all the things that are cool. This is the direction that culture should be heading in, and that's all I've got to say on the matter.
Mm.
I thought that was, that's definitely one of its kind of charms. I think 40 years later.
That was quite kind of a snide, sarcastic introduction. I should say from the off that I absolutely adore this film. I think it's absolutely concentrated brilliance.
What's your history? How many times have you seen it? What's
This is the first time I've seen it.
okay? Wow. All right. Fair
But
enough.
I mean, I'll get into this a bit more later on. But I've always been aware of it, and it's kind of been kicking around in the background. And I've read it's always turned up in things that I've read, and I've read a lot about it.
Yeah. Okay.
And I don't know if I ever had it on tape, but I picked it up on DVD when the BFI brought it out some 10, 11 years ago. And I kind of started watching it, and I was too sleepy for it, so I stopped after about 15 minutes. And then, as with so many films in this series, it just kind of sat on the shelf until you picked it out to do this podcast. And then I watched it, and I'll explain the experience of watching it later on. But yeah, this is my first and second time of watching it. How about you? How come you chose it?
Well, it's exactly the same thing. It's been kicking around in my kind of subconscious for years. It, like you say, it pops up in film books about British cinema. And I saw it on the BFI player listing, and I was like, God, maybe I should just watch this now. But I needed a little bit more motivation, so I flagged it up to you. And so I think we both kind of motivated each other to watch it.
I mean, it may be that my memory's failing, and I did see it in the 90s because I used to know a guy from university who was a lot older than me, and he had very, 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 very good taste. And he would introduce me to films and books that turned out to be great. And I cannot understand how he didn't make me watch this because I know this is absolutely in his wheelhouse. He'd
Yeah,
be
sure.
totally into this. He would have lived. He was the same age, I think, as the protagonist at the time in
Oh,
'79,
yeah, okay.
and would totally have lived and experienced this film. But I'm sure I haven't seen it until now. Coming to this, particularly when you start doing background research on it, you realize just how much writing there is and how much thinking has been done about this.
It's still quite niche, though, isn't it? It's by no means a kind of popular movie. It doesn't really turn up in many lists unless you get to like top 100.
But the people who like it have written about it a lot and have written in
Hmm.
depth. And what I want to flag up at the front is that I don't anticipate anything I'm about to say will have anything like that depth. I can only give you half-baked, mediocre, slightly pretentious opinions on it, and Shane's, more focused versions thereof. And if you want some depth on this, we'll give you a load of links at the bottom, and you can go to those because there is some very, very good writing on this.
Yeah, I think what we're bringing is the having neither of us having seen it before. We're basically two middle-aged virgins looking at this film for the first time.
So I know of Chris Petit. Basically, I read Ian Sinclair books, and Ian Sinclair and Chris Petit are kind of collaborators and friends. And Ian Sinclair's written a lot about Chris Petit's work. And there's a chapter in his book, Lights Out for the Territory, which is like a potted guide to British filmmakers that Ian Sinclair likes and admires. And there's a section on Radio 1 and Chris Petit's subsequent films there. Ian Sinclair wrote one of the BFI Modern Classics books about David Cronenberg's Crash,
Oh yeah, okay.
but he used it, kind of half used it as an excuse to go into the unfilmed Chris Petit version that almost got made,
Oh really?
and to rhapsodize about that.
A digression.
Yeah, and I think he must have mentioned Petit's novel Robinson, which I subsequently read, and I read his book The Hard Shoulder, and I think I gave you Robinson as well, didn't I?
Yeah, you did. Yeah, that's the only reference I have for Chris Petit is Robinson, which I loved. This mad novel about an editor just caught in the kind of wake of a mental director. Drifting in and out of pornography. It just felt like this kind of really seedy Soho '70s, '80s book. I really liked it.
And Petit's, we should go into his background, but he was the film editor of Time Out in the late 70s, and as such had opportunities to meet filmmakers and stuff. And he had this kind of loose idea for what became Radio On kicking around in his head. So he met Wim Wenders and showed him the script and got Wenders' backing and involvement to the tune of about £30,000. And he also, when he was lining up the music choices for the film, he sort of got a bit of music journalism work through Melody Maker and got to meet Kraftwerk,
Yeah, that's right.
and got their involvement with a few songs. But yeah, through his ability to make connections as film editor at Time Out, he got Wenders on board, and he got Wenders' lighting cameraman, Martin Schaefer. He got Lisa Kreutzer involved as an actress,
Hmm.
and through one of the kind of now non-existent but then fairly common kind of like open door filmmaker policies at the BFI at the time, he got like an overall budget of £80,000, of which 30 came from road movies, and made this without any rigorous idea of what it was going to be, but it just seems instinctively to come together absolutely brilliantly.
Yeah, it definitely drifts, doesn't it? I
Mm.
think I have to say, sitting down to watch it, I was kind of ready for, I don't know, an epiphany, a British cinema epiphany, something really kind of soul shaking. And I loved the first half, and then it just sort of like drifts for the back end. And by the time it's finished, I was like, okay, wow, what was that? I really kind of I was left bemused, I think, but enjoyably so. But yeah, it is a strangely constructed film, and I think it's kind of dated well. The sort of noir black and white photography has helped it become like a stylized bubble. But yeah, I just found it. I don't know if some of the ideas have aged as well.
For me, that's where it's kind of like it's gone beyond kind of dating or aging. It's just one of those immaculate time capsule films.
Yeah, sure.
There's this idea that Brian Eno has of the, we call this a scrapbook, as if it's kind of like, things that have been stolen magpie fashion and put together. But I think what it shows is that, because I was reading a Petite interview this morning, and he says that he hadn't read any J.G. Ballard at the time. It's just that his ideas of kind of the motorway and the landscape,
Yeah,
and
zeitgeist, isn't it?
Brian Eno calls it the scenius, where everyone's kind of having very similar ideas at the same time, and they sort of coalesce into what becomes the cultural landscape, or
Hmm.
the new ideas. I think Alan Moore has a similar idea about kind of idea space,
Oh yeah, okay.
kind of puncturing reality for different people at the same time. And I think this is a good example of that. These are the things that were in the air, and the cultural result of them is, on one hand you've got Joy Division, which is very much the same sort of thing. It's like kind of like black and white, slightly modernist, angular,
Hmm.
existential,
Bleak. Yeah.
austere, with cultural nods to a bit of J.G. Ballard and Chris Petit's case, because he's more of a film background. You've got a lot of Wim Wenders in here, a lot of kind
Yeah,
of
yeah.
contemporary German filmmaking, and the kind of ideas that Wenders collaborator, the writer Peter Handke. Forgive me if that pronunciation's wrong, but yeah, he's kind of the writer of German existential novels who Wenders worked with on, I think it was Goalie's Anxiety at the Penalty Kick, Men and Machines, and the interaction thereof, and craft work, and all of these things are kind of happening at the same time, and this film is kind of one of those percolations of all those things.
Well, I was researching. I looked on Time Out just to see what they thought of it. Obviously, him being an ex Time Out critic, and they're really gushing. It says, with an acute sense of transformative hybrid landscapes as equal players in the film's unfolding sensibility, Radio On sits quite literally on the precipice between a failing post-war reality and the coming abyss of Thatcherism. More relevant than ever, Petit's essay on existential inquiry in an English setting remains critical viewing.
I wonder when that was written.
I think like last year or the year before, it was when they did their 100 British films that you must see.
Oh, okay. I wonder what the contemporary review was from the time, and I'd like to know who the film editor at Time Out was at the point when this was released, because Jeff Andrew, who was the film editor throughout a lot of the 90s, he reviewed that Ian Sinclair book on Crash in Sight and Sound when it came out, and he was just like, this is really insufferable. I really wish he'd written a book about the film rather than just banging on yet again about his chum Chris Petit. So yes, I think it's kind of gone beyond being dated, and it's just this kind of timeless snapshot of things that were going on in people's heads.
I think Chris Petit said it was the year of the portable cassette, which marked the start of being able to create one's own soundtrack and play them whilst driving. Windscreen as cinema. I thought that was quite sort of it's timely, isn't it? Because we're plugged into music all the time now. But yeah, just this idea that wow, you could play music in the car, choose it. You could dictate the music that you're listening to instead of just whatever's coming through the antenna.
It is, I mean, obviously for people of a certain age, and I guess it does kind of have historical value, and there's it does capture a lot of things that were still kind of hanging on,
Yeah, yeah,
but it's gone forever now. And there's so many things like that in this film, like the petrol pumps at the station, and buildings that aren't there, and customs that are extinct now. The fact that Robert, the lead character, is able to chuck his tins away coolly
yeah.
is
A couple of times when he's littering, I'm like, oh, come on
yeah,
now.
exactly. It does have that value as well, and I guess there's a point in it where early on in the film, I think he was just driving back from the laundrette, and he parks across the road from the Camden Plaza Cinema,
Yeah, yeah.
and he's just parking his car there. I mean, I don't know if it was possible back then or if it's just kind of sleight of hand, but could you ever park your car outside Camden Tube?
I have to say my granddad was from Ealing, West London, and after the war he moved out to Colchester. So whenever he took us on family trips to go and see his mum, who's still in Ealing, we used to just drive straight through the centre of London, and it was like I mean, this was made at the same time as we were driving through 1979, 1980, and it was like that. It was just felt like Moses. There was no traffic. You just cruise through the city and it parked up. I think my favorite thing about the film was that it's kind of this idea of looking towards European cinema, and that that would be a better path for British cinema to take as a model, as a business model and as a cultural model, instead of the American model, which is, essentially what's happened. There aren't many British films that seem to have a European sensibility. I think there's a few that maybe nod to the influence, but, nothing that is made in that style anymore.
Well, not in the mainstream. I'd say there's still within the BFI. I mean, I know that the BFI like to fund hits, but they do use a lot of the money they make from the hits and a lot of their funding to make a lot of kind of smaller films that they know and the world knows aren't ever going to get anywhere commercially, but they still get made. And a lot of those do have like a European influence.
Have you seen anything else that Chris Petit has done? Because I looked on IMDb. He's got a fairly kind of long filmography. He's done, 4 or 5 other features.
I haven't seen any of his other films. I mean, from the description that Ian Sinclair, a lot of the earlier ones are kind of quite compromised. Chinese boxes always looked sort of interesting, but I kind of get the feeling it would be one of those sort of 80s hodgepodge type movies that kind of falls between two stools, tries to be one thing. I'm judging it without having even seen it. But it doesn't look particularly enticing. It is on DVD, but I'm not going to go out and buy it. If there's a way to watch it sort of without having to make too much effort, I would. But there's a lot of other interesting people connected to this. Produced by Keith Griffiths, who's become, in subsequent years, a kind of a titan of UK independent film. Martin Schaefer, Robbie Muller's camera operator, who must have impressed vendors after this, because he subsequently got to be DOP on Vendors Lightning Over Water and The State of Things, which is an amazingly photographed film.
Yeah, I must say I love the photography in this. It's really kind of lush, black and white. It doesn't look like anything else in a nice way. It sort of has, I don't know, there's like a kind of naivety to it. The photography, it's not trying to emulate anything. It's just capturing that dark space. I've never thought of Bristol as a kind of particularly noirish location, but there's something about the photography that makes it.
It's really evocative, isn't it?
Yeah, it feels like another world. It's very good at kind of creating and capturing this sort of. I think because it's black and white, you don't get the filth of England at that time, and it avoids any of the sort of green and pleasant land, sprawling kind of landscapes that you might get.
The thing that struck me when I was watching it, because I mean, it's not murky in any way, but it's very, very kind of inky,
Hmm.
and the blacks are very, very black. It has that timeless quality of still photography from anywhere in the 20th century.
Yeah, sure.
There's scenes like the nighttime scenes in the factory where Robert works, like the shots of the conveyor belt. You know, you've got those beautiful
Yeah, yeah.
halos on the strong lights, and then the blacks are so dark, and then
Yeah, it's lovely.
it's got those just beautiful kind of still photography tableau feel.
Yeah, and I love how kind of incongruous it is because he's driving an old car and the black and white photography and those kind of deco buildings. You know, you really are sort of a bit kind of lost in the sort of London tapestry, aren't you? I think it's really good at evoking that.
I looked up Anthony Sloman, who is the editor. He's had a very interesting and varied career.
Yeah, I know. Who's the assistant editor on Cross of Iron,
Yeah.
apparently.
And he's been the sound editor on like major films, but then you've also got him as a director of like kind of softcore porn movies in the early 70s.
And he's a historian as well, isn't he?
Should we have a quick look at the cast?
Yeah, yeah, let's do it.
Has David Beams been in anything else that you've seen?
No, I don't think so. I was scouring the IMDb again, just going, I must have seen him in something since. You know, to have a starring role like this, you'd think it would be at least a passport to another strong supporting role around the period, but he just kind of it doesn't get any traction.
Yeah.
He's really got that Le Samurai kind of stoicism, hasn't he? Where even the death of his brother and finding out that he may have been involved in some really kind of sex trafficking porno business, that it doesn't really faze him, and he's kind of quite nonplussed about it as well. I think he's got a good kind of look on screen, hasn't he? Has a very weird haircut in the first act, which he goes from looking really cool to looking quite square. And I couldn't work out why he'd done it until we see later on in the film him standing beside a slide of his brother projected on a wall, and he looks exactly like him. He's wearing the same clothes and he's had the same haircut as his brother. And yeah, just those strange little details that make it quite compelling.
Sandy Ratcliffe as Kathy, his
Yeah.
his brother's girlfriend. Sandy Ratcliffe's a funny one. I know that her defining role is Sue in EastEnders,
Sue in EastEnders, yeah.
but I never ever think of that. And I used to watch EastEnders like right the way through from 85 to 90. I never connect Sandy Ratcliffe with that role. I always think of her in that early Ken Loach movie, Family Life.
Oh, I've never seen it.
She's so good in that, and then she's got a little tiny role in that Michael Moorcock adaptation, Final Program. So I was quite pleased to see her in this doing something else with some edge. Sue Jones Davis as the girl. I don't know if she lives in Robert's flat or Robert lives in hers, or if they live together or if he's just visiting. Did you recognise her?
No, not at all.
She played Judith in The Life of Brian.
Oh, right, okay. Yeah, yeah.
And I went down a sort of Wikipedia page, and she was married to Chris Langham, disgraced former comedian Chris Langham at the time.
Yeah, yeah.
And she was also mayor of Aberystwyth from 2008 to 2009.
Wow.
That's full life. Lisa Kreutzer as Ingrid, sort of reprising the same role as Alice in the Cities, really.
Yeah, Wim Wenders said, have you got a part for Lisa? And Chris Petit apparently was just like, well, maybe she could pick up where she left off in Alice in the Cities. And that's it, yeah. She's like looking for a little girl called Alice who's with her father after, the mother abandoned her, I suppose.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a shame, really, he didn't do more with her because she's brilliant.
I think she's got just enough to do in it. She's perfect. I mean, what's interesting about it is there is no drama in this. Nothing happens. There are no relationships.
There's no melodrama, is there?
Yeah, there's nothing at all. So she's there and she's a presence in the film and in his life, but nothing's going to change his lack of action. And he's got no narrative, has he? So nothing's going to...
he's unaffected by anybody else's and his own situation, really. Just kind of stepping through the space.
There's a credit in here for the actress Tilly Vosberg, who was fantastic in a few years later in Mike Leigh's Meantime. Have you seen that?
Yeah, I have, but I can't think who she was in this.
She was the young woman who lived on the same estate, who sort of had a bit of a crush on the Tim Roth character.
No, in this.
Oh, in this? Well, that's it. I can't see her in this. Maybe she's in the background in the pub or something. But she's got a credit, but I just can't perceive where she is.
Talking of random people, the the little boy that he talks to at the hot dog stand.
Yeah.
He's credited as Paul Hollywood, the famous celebrity baker. Apparently, it's the same guy. Doesn't look anything like him.
Right.
when you follow the links, it all joins together. But yeah,
Okay.
I found that really hard to swallow.
I was very, very happy to see the woman who bullies him when he's drunk in the pub at the end in Bristol,
Yeah, yeah,
knocks him off his stool, is
yeah.
Kim Tailforth. She's Gillian Tailforth's sister, but around about this time, she had one of the biggest sort of female supporting roles in The Knowledge. Have you seen that?
No, no,
Oh,
you've
it's
talked about this before.
fantastic. It's about somebody who's learning the knowledge to become a London cabbie,
Yeah.
and she's the kind of supportive stroke nagging girlfriend in it. And she's brilliant. She's very funny.
Oh, right,
So I
okay.
was always happy to see her on screen.
The only other note I had was Andrew Byatt, who was the Scottish deserter from the army that we meet about halfway through the film, and he set up the Actors' Cut in Edinburgh, which is basically a stage school. But he was the hotel manager in Succession when they have their
Yes, I saw that.
Glaswegian wedding. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I guess last but by no means least is Sting's cameo, playing the character just like Eddie.
I I don't hate Sting as much as the world at large of my generation seemed to. I didn't really like him in this very much.
Oh, I thought he was really good in this
Yeah.
because I'd seen Chris Petit said he didn't like the sequence, and he said the two Martins, the sound recordist and the cameraman, both talked him into letting Sting do a little bit of singing, and I thought it was a really nice sort of end to the first half of the film. It just kind of closes out with Sting strumming. I thought it was really nice. I thought he was quite effortless and charming.
I liked what the scene was saying. I like the fact that these kind of rock and roll things just seem to be fading away now till they're just like clippings on the side of a caravan door
Yeah, yeah.
that this loner's just playing to
He
himself.
plays a little bit of craft work, doesn't he, on the car's cassette player and switches it straight off like it's an anathema to his ears. He's
Yeah.
like, "What is that?" I never really tied Three Steps to Heaven to Bowie's Queen Bitch either, but you can hear it, can't you, straight away?
Mm. So this is often described as a road movie, but I think that's a bit misleading.
Yeah, man,
It's
it's hardly any road stuff in there, and every time he kind of pulls onto the motorway, you get 30 seconds of driving, and then he pulls off into a service station or
yeah,
something else. Yeah, it's not really a road movie.
and it's not even loosely speaking. There is a journey. There's a couple of journeys to and from work, which is hardly road movie stuff, and there is
Yeah,
a journey to Bristol,
yeah,
and that's it. But my notes here, I've got it's kind of like it kind of sets out its stall early on when you have the opening shot, which kind of holds on that long Kraftwerk quote. It's sort of meditation on men and machines because the lead character is constantly using tapes and records and traveling in vehicles and traveling in technology, and he kind of lives isolated in this kind of artificial world of his own making. Even his choice of job kind of isolates him, working at night, listening to records on his
yeah.
own.
Yeah, that's
Um,
quite a strange job, isn't it? Is he a DJ? You know, like you have hospital DJs. Is
yeah,
he a DJ for? It seems like a couple of factories on an industrial estate, and he plays music throughout the night to keep them entertained.
Yeah, oddly, Wikipedia has like a one paragraph summary of this movie, and one of the things it flags up quite prominently at the end is that his role as a DJ is quite similar to I think it was like United Radio, that was something that the United Biscuits factories used to have. They used to actually have their own in house DJ.
Oh yeah, yeah. But he works at a biscuit factory, doesn't he?
I
We
couldn't
see some
tell.
biscuits. Yeah, there's definitely some biscuits.
It looks because I worked in an ice cream factory for a summer once, and it looked very, very similar to that. Like separating out the biscuits on the conveyor
Yeah,
belt as
yeah,
it comes by. But then I guess he must have been on an industrial state because when he came out to his car, you could see a Gillette sign quite prominently in the background.
mm-hmm.
One way of looking at the movie is that it's it is a meditation on man and technology and where the grey areas in between, where you're using this technology, how it can affect you and how you live within that world. It's also I find it quite moving in places. It's just the melancholy of the whole thing. It's about like nighttime and early morning and disconnection and being isolated from people
Yeah,
and society. Even even the person that he seems to live with, they have virtually no communication at all
yeah.
between them.
That's it. I mean, he's definitely living a life that's contrary to it. Societies, isn't he? He's up all night. He sleeps through the day. He's kind of isolated and insular. His everything about his life just is a little box that he kind of lives in. Robert is he seems quite lethargic and quite bored by everything around him. It's not like he's stimulated and inspired by anything. Even I think even the music that he's playing as a DJ, he kind of doesn't listen to. He takes his headphones off and is just kind of going through the mechanics of putting records on a turntable and pressing play. That's it.
I never found him bored. Um, I found him distracted. He always seems,
He's disconnected, I think.
but not totally disconnected. Not, he's not like, let's say, Philip Winter at the beginning of Alice in the Cities, who is clearly exhausted and
Yeah,
disconnected.
sure.
He does seem fairly curious, but he's just not settling. Another way to look at it, which certainly I think the film does itself, is as a weird form of like music compilation album.
Yeah.
Or oddly enough,
Well,
maybe it's like an early form of music video, because at the beginning of the film in the credits you get the actors' names, and then you get the titles of the songs and the
yeah,
artists.
it's like featuring the music of, and then you have this long sort of ticker tape kind of list of everybody's music and the tracks that they're using. Yeah, it definitely eats up quite a bit of time right at the front of the film. But the music definitely drops away in the back half of the film as well. That's when we see Sting. After that, there's hardly any other music used. It really is all loaded up at the front, the soundtrack.
Yeah, but from that point on, he has to engage with people, so he doesn't get much time to spend on his own doing that, does he?
Mm, yeah, exactly.
After that, he's talking to Kathy, or he's talking to Ingrid. So it's only kind of when he disappears off on his own at the end of the film that he gets any time to do that again. I wish I could find the interview. I'm sure that I read an interview with Petit where he said that this wasn't actually music that he was listening to at the time. He wasn't actually into kind of like Berlin era Bowie or any of this sort of thing. He just used to listen to things like ABBA that were on the radio because he really liked those harmonies.
It's all very cool, though, isn't it? The music, to use the version of Bowie's Heroes at the beginning that has the German lyrics. I just thought, as it moves into that, you're like, oh, that's a nice touch. It's kind of, I think that opening sequence I really loved, where the camera's just roving around this apartment and looking at the details. There's like I don't know if it's supposed to be the dead brother's manifesto or his suicide note or what it's supposed to be, but the camera just stops on that, so we've got time to read it, and drifts around the apartment. I just thought that was really nice stuff with that tune blasting all the way through it.
It's interesting you flagged that up. It just occurred to me, maybe, obviously we're not speaking in a literal sense, but this film does seem to happen more inside his dead brother's head than it does in Robert's. Yeah, because this quote from Kraftwerk and the music that the Kraftwerk cassettes that he sends to Robert, they all come from him. These ideas, he's the one who has the collection of slides of pornography and
Mm-hmm.
stuff. All these ideas that the film deals with are more to do with what the brother was feeling and thinking than Robert himself
Yeah.
consciously. Going through the film from start to finish, hopefully not too laboriously, one of the things that the film has many of is things that no longer exist. And the film opens up with a burst of radio tuning, which you just don't get anymore. It does not exist. And we alight on David Bowie's Heroes stroke Helden and the credits typed on screen as per a telegram, which we don't have anymore.
It's nice. I love the idea that all of this technology at the time was kind of really exciting and liberating and groundbreaking, and now we're just so complacent with our technology. This idea that we can do all of that on our phones, and if our phone even dares to kind of reboot, it drives us crazy. Like, come on, I need all of this now. I think that was their limitations, and how inspiring that was at the time. How much change it seemed to represent.
There's a list of actors, and then, as I said before, there's a list of the bands and songs, like a compilation album. Recently saw Gaspar Noé's Climax, which does the same thing, but it goes one better. It has all the band logos for all the bands who contribute to the
Oh,
soundtrack
really?
in the
Oh, yeah.
opening
Okay.
credits. Then we have this long handheld shot going up the stairs of the flat in Bristol, as we'll find out later, and exploring various nooks and crannies. And it picks out a lot of reference points for the film. You've
Yeah,
got
I love it.
Patricia Highsmith's Ripley novels on the side. David Bowie's Heroes, as it turns out, playing on a Roberts radio, which only exists as a kind of DAB version of now. And then we got the Kraftwerk quote on the wall, which I guess is worth quoting in full.
Do it. You have to do it in a robot voice, though.
We are the children of Fritz Lang and Werner von Braun. We are the link between the 20s and the 80s. All change in society passes through a sympathetic collaboration with tape recorders, synthesizers, and telephones. Our reality is an electronic reality. a lot of the furniture in the flat is now defunct furniture, things that were left over from previous decades that we as young people may have come across as children, but just don't exist anymore at all.
Are you talking about things like that big plastic centerpiece in the bathroom,
Yeah,
which, you know, has the shelves and the mirrors and the sink all kind of bonded into one huge unit thing? Yeah.
kitchen cupboards that were all bonded together, the lower and upper sections with a cooker built in and all of that. He's also got the rickety and very dangerous original sash windows in like a fifth floor flat.
Yeah, sure. The guillotine.
And there's stuff like that that pops up later in the film. The old GT petrol pumps, the rock and roll that Sting is singing to himself is fading into oblivion. Apart from perhaps Shakin' Stevens and Shawaddy Waddy, like rock and roll hasn't really lived. It's just an
Well,
anachronistic.
those two references are pretty dated. Yeah, there is no sort of 21st century rock and rollers, are there?
And then we pass the brother in the bath, who we don't realise is dead until later in the film. And then we have the title shot, which is
So cool,
it's
isn't it?
one of the best things I've ever seen. It's
Yeah.
the fact that you hold on it for so long, you get a feel of the time and place, and you manage to embed the title of your film into that time and
Yeah,
place
yeah,
is
yeah.
just brilliant.
And it's Bristol Hippodrome, isn't it? I think
Yeah.
it's easy to think it's London, but yeah, and that ties in nicely with the narrative. They talk about Eddie Cochran halfway through the film, and who just performed at Bristol Hippodrome when he died. And yeah, this, I don't know, Bristol seems to have as equal standing as London in terms of the, you know, the filmmakers' views of it as a city.
So we have a series of establishing scenes after that where we get to meet Robert and his life. We open with him outside a laundrette waiting for his friend's laundry.
It's quite cool because it, like, everything in it looks really sort of iconic and stylish, and then you realize, oh, he's just waiting for the tumble dryer to finish, so he's nipped out to the car to open some post and listen to a tape.
His brother sent him an envelope of Kraftwerk cassette tapes, which were, I mean, just seeing purchased cassette tapes was a rush of nostalgia for me.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, I used to buy cassette tapes when I only had a tape deck when I was 8 years old, which was about back then. Just seeing the packaging where they didn't even try to adapt the album cover to a rectangle. They just put the album cover at the bottom and then the title at the top.
Yeah, it's a little square, isn't it? Yeah. Thumbnail.
I'm really surprised, I don't know if it was beyond their technical means, that they didn't include the little kind of audio test sound that used to be at the beginning of each cassette tape. Like little noise it used to make.
Oh, I had hundreds of tapes. I don't ever remember that. Maybe it's just one of those things that never registered. You're more technical than I am.
And then he drives home, and as I said before, he manages to park outside Camden Town Tube.
But there's a nice bit where he puts in the Kraftwerk tape and he listens to a little bit of Radioactive, and then he switches it off and switches the wipers on and listens to the wipers and then switches it off again. I just thought that was really nice. He was like, "What does this sound like?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, it sounds like the wipers."
He seems to live above
No, above the cinema.
the,
Yeah,
the
it's so
Plaza
cool.
Cinema. I mean, it was heartbreaking to see the Plaza Cinema again, because I used to go to see films there a lot when I first came to London in the early 90s. It got brutally redeveloped in the mid 90s. I remember hearing at the time it was closed, and there was obviously a lot of controversy about the development, and there was some toing and froing, and it didn't look like it might necessarily go ahead. But then the developers went in and just gutted it anyway, so they wouldn't be able to kind of go back.
Yeah.
Still miss that cinema to this day. It was one of my, when I came to London, there was scores of cinemas to go to, but that was the one I used to choose to see things at. He lives with a woman who, is it his lover, his ex-lover? Is it? I'm wondering if she's, I might be reading too much into it, but there's this constant backdrop of reports of terrorism and then also of this pornography ring.
Yeah, yeah.
And when he comes to visit her or comes home to the flat, she's watching 3 TVs at once, in what looks like a reference to the man who fell to Earth,
Yeah.
who's another isolated alien in modern society. I'm wondering, is she a political criminal or a fugitive or a terrorist? Or...
There's a thing later on, isn't there, on the wall, which is free Astrid Prohl, who was the girl from Baader Meinhof, who fled Germany and lived in Hackney for a little bit. She worked as a park ranger for the councils, and she worked at the Lesney's toy factory, the toy cars.
Yeah.
And that space is next to my kids' school now.
Okay.
Yeah, so, yeah, I think it's probably this idea that there were I don't know, I don't want to say like dissidents or terrorists, but anti-establishment countercultural figures were, moving around underground
Mm.
maybe. And I think, yeah, she seems quite transient.
I wonder if that's something that's sort of hinted at there.
And she looks a little bit like Bob Dylan, which I thought was quite funny.
It's funny how 70s terrorism is, or the backdrop of terrorism and political agitation is part of the musical landscape, or how the two things sort of feed into each other. Well, I'm thinking of like when I watched Olivier Assayas, again, pronunciation. I never get to speak to people about movies, so I don't know how these things are pronounced.
You're talking about Carlos the Jackal.
Yeah, which I
Mm.
thought was fantastic. But
Yeah, it's excellent.
when I first started watching it, like my ears were twitching. It's like, hang on a sec, the music that you're using as the backdrop for things that are happening in the early mid 70s is music from 1981, 82, 83, or possibly earlier than that. But it's like post-punk music, kind of harsh and austere and with more edge, is being used as the backdrop music, not diegetically, not within the film, but just as kind
Yeah,
of
yeah.
as the music, for things that are happening in the 70s, because there's that kind of relationship between the two. It's kind of like edgy post-punk
Mm.
music.
Yeah, the overlap, yeah.
It feels more representative of terrorism and political agitation. So there's a snowy drive over the Westway, J.G. Ballard's beloved Westway. Odd to learn that Petit hadn't actually read any Ballard at the time.
Yeah, it's mad, isn't it?
There's a really nice bit we have, obviously, like through the windscreen, and then you get to see him working in the night shift, which is, I guess, just the absolute definition of an isolated job, DJing on the night shift in a factory. The amazing shots of the factory assembly lines and the atmosphere of the place.
I like it. Somebody's asked if he can play Help Me Make It Through the Night, and he says, well, here's something better, and just plays a totally different record.
Yeah, he's definitely a hipster DJ, isn't he?
Yeah, and he's a bit of a know-it-all.
Yeah. And then you get his loner time after work, where he kind of stops off on the way home in the middle of
He
the
goes to
night.
an arcade.
Yeah, playing video games in a looks like an arcade or a roadside cafe.
It's funny actually seeing that because, I don't know, I think there's a temptation to look back on arcades of the 80s and get quite kind of Tron about it and how sort of cool and amazing they were, but a lot of them were just sort of tagged onto cafes. So here they just kind of smelt of like vinegar and cigarettes and just these sort of bloop, bloop, bloop
Yeah.
in the background of that kind of space.
Odd bit of geography where he seems to come off the Westway and then turn off Euston Road and then park up and seem to be at
Yeah.
home again. But the section where he gets home again, and I put home in inverted commas, and gets the call from his mother about his brother's death, is one of those great bits of 70s filming that nobody really seems to do anymore.
You're talking about this sort of long tracking shot, and
Yeah,
it's like crane up, and the characters moving in the foreground and background. Yeah,
yeah.
it's really nice.
The thing that kind of originates from Antonioni movies, and then you get it filtered through like Wim Wenders, and there's the famous one in Taxi Driver as well, where Travis is on the phone pleading with Betsy to give him
Mm.
a second chance, and the camera just pans off to the corridor and
Yeah, yeah,
ignores him. I mean, this is a great shot because the phone call happens, much of it's off screen, and then the camera kind of pans around and finds him framed foreground with a window, and you got that. I don't know. It's just so wonderfully evocative of again that's
it's elegant, isn't it? It's an elegant shot
yeah.
that ends with his girlfriend framed, or non-girlfriend framed in the window opposite the court in the across the courtyard.
But it's not just the fact that it's a beautifully framed shot. It's just there's something about urban living. You don't really get those views anywhere other than in a city. When you're sitting with somebody at a window and then you can see the alcove of a building and then another window
Oh yeah, I
that's
see what
the
you
other
mean.
half of the
Yeah.
building. It's just this wonderful kind of, again, forgive my pretension, but this kind of evocation of urban living.
Hmm.
And whilst we're talking about evocations of urban living, the shot following this from the top of the Plaza Cinema looking down at Inverness Street as the market traders are packing up,
Yeah, sure.
just gives me shivers every time.
Yeah,
It's
it's great.
it's not just that it's a beautiful shot and beautiful photographically. It's just that there is something about England, English towns and cities in the winter when things are packing up and everyone's heading home, for tea and for warmth.
Hmm.
It's just, and you can hear the echoing of the streets and everything. It's just incredible.
Yeah, yeah.
The use of music here, I have to flag up that there's a Robert Fripp track, which is instantly recognizable as Robert Fripp if you know his stuff. because Robert Fripp and Brian Eno developed this system of tape delays for recording. So you use a tape delay setup whilst you're recording, so you can hear what you've. It's basically like the looping systems that people use now,
Hmm.
but it gradually fades away. Whatever you've recorded will come back to you, and then you can play in harmony on top of that and build these layers, and they'll kind of. So he developed it further into a system of digital delays called Frippatronics, and he made whole albums of it, and they sound a bit like the track that's used here. So I
Right.
went and had
Okay.
to look what it was. But the actual track here is called Urban Landscape, which is used
All right.
on the nose whenever you see an urban landscape in the movie. But it's from a Robert Fripp album called Exposure, which is when he was trying, I feel that he was trying to be a rock star again because he had been part of King Crimson, which was very 70s, very long hair, long, 10-minute tracks, 15-minute tracks, very, very good prog rock. With Exposure, this album, he's trying to reinvent himself with a short haircut and a good suit,
Yeah, sure.
and he's kind of like, because he was already part of Bowie's wider circle. He plays guitar on Heroes. He was consciously marketing and trying to produce an album that would appeal to that rock circuit. So you've got tight, brisk songs that are quite angular and strange melodies and things. The reason I think it's interesting, and it's probably just a coincidence, but because that was the point at which Robert Fripp was trying to reinvent or refocus himself with that album. The scene where he gets a haircut, I think, is quite interesting because he's kind of reflecting on changing styles. And I think there's a thing when we talk about art, we don't like to talk about fashion. We don't like to talk about people, artists, or people or characters being aware of fashion. But I think this is actually a fashionable film. 40 years on now, I think it's like a timelessly fashionable cultural artifact. But I think at the time, all the ideas in it were cool ideas. And I think Robert is, he's a bit isolated and everything, but he has his own ideas about what he likes, and what he likes is generally quite fashionable. And he is going to get a more fashionable haircut. I mean, you described it as square, but it is kind of like,
I don't know. I think he has a nice haircut before he goes in, and then he comes out with a kind of fuzzy microphone head, which I just
yeah, but
thought was.
that was what was fashionable at the time. But I do think that Robert is concerned with what's fashionable, and he's not concerned as in worried about it, but he does like the fashionable things, and I think this film does
He's
like.
abreast of fashion.
And I think this film also is.
So you don't think it's window dressing? You think it's like actual, again, statements of intent, to be trendy and to be kind of on trend. And
Absolutely, these were the types of music that were cool at the time, and this was the look that was cool at the time. He's quite well dressed. He's got kind of austere but well cut clothes. When you see the old black and white photos of Joy Division at the time,
yeah,
they're all quite well dressed. And then when he goes to Bristol, he has a pretty nice leather jacket.
yeah, it's your classic, isn't it?
I think he's a fashionable person. He is, and it kind of that does tie into the idea of reinvention again, and forward motion and forward progress.
Identity, I guess. If you're on the cusp of an existential crisis, you can at least define your outward presentation.
Mm. And speaking of people on the cusp of an existential crisis, the next piece of music used is David Bowie always crashing in the same car, which is one of
Hmm.
his key Berlin works from the period where he was actually on the verge of a total personal crisis, and went to
Yeah,
Berlin
sure.
to isolate himself from that and work on these
Hmm.
records. He's driving north at this point, and we see the Westway, but we also see kind of dereliction and the old buildings which are coming down.
I love that though when you're in a period of like clear transition between past and future. I love it. I think I've mentioned it before, but Passport to Pimlico has this great kind of post-war bombed out look, as well as this kind of redevelopment and investment in infrastructure that's happening at the same time as they're rebuilding the city. I really love that, and you get that here.
Yeah, as part of that transition and reinvention, we have shots of tower blocks and modernity coming in, and you've got that amazing high wide shot that just keeps on
Yeah, it's
giving.
really cool,
You
isn't
watch
it?
the car passing, and then you hold, and then what are you holding for, and then you see kind of like the train on the overpass coming across.
Yeah, yeah,
That's
yeah.
incredible.
Yeah, that's where it just said in the edit, "I'll just leave it. Don't touch it. Don't touch it."
And then it follows up with the very, very famous trick shot the car driving along and the plane taking off in the background. It was either extreme luck or masterful planning and timing to get that.
It's Heathrow, isn't it? He's going past Heathrow.
I like the way that the motorway shots are scored with craft work, but they use radioactivity. I mean, on the nose thing you'd think would be autobahn, but radioactivity sounds better, and
Yeah,
it
right.
sounds the tone of it is more in keeping with the tone of the movie.
Yeah, he's driving really slowly though, which I find quite annoying. He gets overtaken twice, and then he peels off straight away onto the services. It's like, come on, man, just like get into the fast lane.
Beautiful snowy fields when he gets outside the city. Actually, the blurb for the forthcoming edition, Blu-ray edition, which we'll talk about later, makes much of this movie's kind of evocations of weather, which I thought were incidental, but when you do get them, they're beautiful, aren't they? Snowy fields,
Hmm.
and there's some shots later towards the end where he's driving through country lanes, and there's kind of the morning mist
Yeah, yeah,
coming off
that's
things and
nice.
drifting across the road. And then we get the section with the squatter who's gone AWOL. It's the kind of role that you'd kind of associate Robert Carlyle with these days.
Yeah, sure.
Again, his monologue of his experiences in Ireland, another reminder of this kind of background of violence and instability that's part of the mood of the film.
I really like the monologue and the performance, but I also like it that Robert's trying to kind of empathize, but he's also terrified. And the moment that the guy gets out to have a wee, he just like leaves him, doesn't he? And the guy's like, you bastard," and he just ditches him in the. I thought that was going to come back and bite him on the ass at some point, but I'm glad it didn't. But yeah, that guy's terrifying.
And then you get the really, really astonishing, iconic shot. You get the twilight drive on the motorways, but then you get that incredible shot approaching the Grosvenor Hotel on that raised overpass.
Yeah, yeah,
Such an incredible shot and a location. And I was kind of praying that it would come back again in the film, and luckily it
it
does,
does.
even
Yeah,
more
yeah.
strikingly. And another of those things that I guess you just don't get anymore. You had the football results on the radio in the background
Oh yeah.
as he pulls into Bristol, which to me is the sound of mundane boredom.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
the sound of
Saturday afternoons,
yeah.
isn't it? Waiting for the football to finish so you can watch Batman. You've skipped Sting.
We've talked about Sting.
Oh, yeah, okay.
I like the fact that when he gets to his brother's flat, or what turns out to be Kathy's flat, actually, he knows how to break in with a credit card, which is a
Yeah, sure.
slightly shady character touch. And we realise this is the flat we saw earlier. We have a quick look around it with him.
Yeah, I love this stuff because, he's wearing, I guess it's a cream trench coat. It's black and white, obviously, but yeah, he's wearing a trench coat and he does look like your sort of classic cinema detective patrolling around an apartment looking for the clues and the detail. You think it's going to go somewhere completely different where it doesn't really, it's just a strong image, isn't it?
I could never quite decode the conversation that he has with Kathy. It's a mysterious death, and she's talking about the police coming and searching and bringing sniffer dogs in. Whatever he was involved in, and even how he actually died is always left quite murky, isn't it?
Yeah, just that there's a lot of suspicion around it and that he may have been involved with this stuff that we've been hearing on the radio
Mm.
about pornography and prostitution and drugs in Bristol and the kind of the west of England. We're given enough to assume he's part of that.
Robert goes to a local club that the kid recommends,
Platform one.
Platform One, just around the corner. I found it really unfair that the club is clearly a bit of a crap club with a restrictive dress code that
Dress code, yeah.
you wouldn't really want to go to anyway.
Yeah,
But they're playing Lucky Number by Lena Lovitch, which I guess is another one they got off the Stiff
yeah, yeah.
roster from the time. I really like that song.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like the fact that it's played in a crap club, and then later on it's playing in the pub as well, where he gets bullied by Kim Tailforth,
Yeah, yeah.
which is another kind of crap venue. Still, each to his own. He meets Ingrid and Ingrid's friend at the station, who seem to have missed their train, and gives them a lift back to the Grosvenor. I mean, this whole thing is straight out of Vendors, isn't it? It's a troubled mother who you meet in transit, who's quite attractive and who you will not end up sleeping with
Yeah,
as
yeah.
much as you would like to.
Yeah.
And there's a kind of tentative connection between them that's not really going to go anywhere. The scene does end in this just that remarkable shot, isolating them and framing them as separate windows in the room from outside as you drive past on the
As the
overpass.
car goes past, yeah, on the flyover, it's really nice. I do find his performance quite stilted in that scene. I think, it's obviously he doesn't have a clue what they're talking about. But when she's saying about losing her daughter to the father, and he just says, Does he have a court order to keep her? It's like this really weird line of dialogue. It's like, sorry, what? That's not how you would respond in that situation. Be like, oh my god, that's terrible. Like, how do you feel? Not, does he have a court order to keep her? It's like he can't quite join the words together.
Well, it's not surprising there's not really much connection between them then. And then you follow up. We are back, I guess, at Kathy's flat, and he's watching a slideshow that he's found of his brother's slides.
Yeah, I love those old carousels.
And a lot of it is hardcore porn. I was surprised watching it and knowing how J.G. Ballard the scene was. I was surprised there wasn't like shots of weaponry in there too, and then
Yeah.
buildings and car details. But I guess knowing that Petit wasn't into Ballard at the time, it's just a coincidence. And he finally comes face to face with his brother via the kind of slide being projected on the wall.
It's a nice shot, that, isn't it?
It's really nice. You do kind of feel the hand on your shoulder pushing you a bit, saying, "Look, this is a key image. This is a key image in the film. You should be paying
Mm.
attention to this."
Yeah, well, it's a mirror image, isn't it? It's so stylized. He's got the same haircut and clothes as his brother, and they're sort of facing each other. One is a 2D slide, and the other one is a 3D human. I think it's nice. Yeah.
Breakfast conversation with Kathy. There's references again to taking sides, which is something that made me think this is something more to do with the IRA and political trouble than pornography. But I guess the two things could be
Yeah,
interlinked,
it's
couldn't they?
quite vague, isn't it? It's sort of, it must be just that he's deliberately being ambiguous.
Mm. Is there anything to talk about the scene with Ingrid's relative? Is it her mother?
It's her ex-partner's auntie. It's a nice kind of dilapidated Art Deco house, isn't it? And she says,
Yeah, she came to England the same year this house was built.
yeah, it's starting to kind of crumble as well as her sort of old views of the world.
Well, this does kind of like lead into the next section where Robert and Ingrid are just kind of hanging around in the seaside in kind of dilapidated seaside environments.
Oh, they're at Burnbeck Pier, aren't they?
And it's quite a bleak afternoon. But there's all these kind of bits of dead culture, the dead seaside culture, and there's the old motor showroom as well with the
I don't know, just all
vintage
those
cars.
lovely old vehicles abandoned, it seems like, in this showroom.
But it's all the things that get left behind in this forward momentum towards modernity.
Yeah, there's a nice thing where he's sat in is it a Cadillac? Ingrid just says to him, that car doesn't suit you, which I thought was nice.
They kind of go their separate ways, don't they? She drives him home,
Yeah.
beautifully lit, beautifully framed shots. I didn't feel as kind of like anticlimactic as you did, but it's at this point, there are no answers for him. There's no drama. There is nothing left to happen, really, is there? So his next shot is he's
Yeah,
hanging.
but he's not looking for answers either. When Ingrid asks him about her brother, he just says, "Oh, it wasn't that important, and maybe it's going to rain." Like it's on equal standing. His brother's mysterious death and what the weather's going to do.
Yeah, it's true. The feeling is that something will happen to him, but there's no forward momentum.
I think there's a few things in this. Like there's one shot that I really love, which is him standing in like a really dirty old playground as the train goes past, and the camera does this kind of long track back, and we see him. It's a bit telling, but we see him sort of stepping over the tracks as the camera kind of swoops around. I thought that was the sort of last flourish of really great cinematography, and then everything else seems kind of a little bit more point and shoot.
Isn't that appropriate to the situation he finds himself in? There's nothing, previously he was going somewhere. He was heading to his brother's to find out what was going
Yeah,
on, and his life had some.
a momentary purpose.
Now he doesn't have that. He's just kind of,
It's back to the drift, isn't
yeah, and it has affected him. He's kind of drinking pretty much non-stop. He's actually drunk when he's in that pub, and then in the car wash later on, he's kind of like with a very pointed cover version of Satisfaction playing. But then, when he ends up in the quarry, he's still drinking tins of Guinness throughout the day. So
he?
it has kind of affected him in a way.
And littering. He's still
Still
littering.
littering, tossing his tins. But I really, really liked the end of the movie where he kind of reaches the verge. His story goes as far as it can, and then he just kind of wanders away from it.
Yeah, yeah.
Puts on some theme music and wanders away. And ironically, the track that he's listening to as he walks away is called Ohm, Sweet Ohm, OHM.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, if you take the double meaning as home, a sweet home, which he does not have. How did you find it then? This having lived under the shadow of this for so long, how did you find actually?
Well, yeah, not even that really. It was so peripheral, but just it felt like, like a a box that I just needed to tick off at some point, and I knew I'd get round to it. So I was happy when you jumped on it. And I think I was anticipating a more earth-shattering experience the first time, just to be kind of really like blown away by something, and it left me, like I said before, it left me quite perplexed. But what I liked about it the second time round was, Robert's character and his journey and how sort of understated all of that stuff was, and getting time to have a second pass on the visuals, and yeah, I liked it more second time round. Is what I'm trying to say.
For me, it was just like putting on a comfortable pair of slippers. And I think the reason is I have had, a couple of decades of preparation getting into the same things that this film is into. If I'd seen it when I was 20, when I was first getting into movies, like a lot of it would have gone over my head, and I think it just would have been a bit blank for me.
Oh, I see.
But there's this thing that you do, like, when I was young, I think it's important to be into the stuff that's around there at the time. And then you pick up on the other stuff that previous generations, like people 10 years older or 20 years older, have left behind. So that's the point where you
Hmm.
start listening to older music. You start listening to for me, it was you start listening to Eno, and you learn about that sort of thing. And then you listen to Kraftwerk and more sort of German krautrock type stuff. You read your J.G. Ballard when you're in your 20s, not when you're in your teens. You
Hmm.
pick up on all this canon stuff as you get a bit older. And I think having done that for decades, when I came to this finally, it was just like
It's the icing on your cultural
it's
cake.
just like walking into a room full of people who you instantly get on with. It's just like,
Yeah. Okay.
yeah, okay, fine, yeah, this is great.
Hmm.
Um, so it was a really odd but pleasant experience in that way. I'm gonna watch it again later this year.
Yeah, I think you mentioned there's a Blu-ray coming,
Yeah,
a,
there's
a full restoration.
because when I was watching this, it was from a DVD, and the DVD was clearly from a print, and the
Hmm.
print like hadn't been manufactured in with a great deal of care and attention, because there was pos scratches on the print, and there's some negative scratches here and there, but the print itself, it was fluctuating in dark scenes,
Hmm. Yeah, yeah.
um, and it wasn't brilliant, but they've just restored it from the camera negative 4K, so whatever comes out later this year is going to be a revelation, I think. Having said that, I was totally prepared for it, and enjoyed it thoroughly as a result. I don't know how or who I could recommend this to unless I knew that they liked the things that fed into it. Do you think coming to it afresh, it would be?
I don't know, man. I feel like as a recommendation, I think you'd have to get somebody really young, basically, who's like teenage, and just see it as something totally different from, I guess if you're the Netflix generation, this is going to seem like a really far out experimental movie. And I think it might just trigger, a different path, which is kind of one of the subtexts of the film, right? To maybe look towards Europe and less about the American influence, or just somebody our age who's a kind of film aficionado who's just missed it. I don't know. There's definitely something important about viewing it and getting just a better perspective on British cinema for sure.